When people think of D-Day, they imagine the chaos of battle. Machine gun fire raining down from the cliffs, landing craft smashing into the surf, young soldiers charging across the beaches of Normandy. But what happened after the gunfire stopped is a story rarely told. For behind the triumph of June 6, 1944, came a grim reality. The sand was carpeted with bodies. Thousands of Americans, British, Canadians, and Germans lay lifeless, tangled in barbed wire, washed up by the tide, or collapsed in the fields beyond the shore. Victory had come, but at a terrible, haunting cost. By the evening of D-Day, more than 10,000 Allied soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. German casualties were also in the thousands. The beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword looked less like landing zones and more like graveyards. Bodies floated in the surf, many dragged under by the weight of their gear. Others were sprawled across the sand, riddled with bullets, their faces barely recognizable. And there was no time for grief. For the men still alive, the battle wasn't over. They had to push inland, fight through hedgerows and villages, and hold the fragile beachhead. That meant the dead were left where they fell, sometimes for days, under the summer sun and the stench of gunpowder. Only when the front lines began to move could soldiers return to the task of burying the fallen. Medics, engineers, and even fellow infantrymen dug shallow graves under fire. Helmets, rifles, or makeshift wooden crosses marked the spots. These burials were hurried and uneven. Some men were laid to rest alone, others piled together in ditches or shell craters. German bodies too were buried quickly, though often in separate plots or mass graves. For both sides, the goal was the same: prevent disease, restore some order, and make sure the advancing armies didn't choke on the horror left behind. For the men tasked with these burials, it was a nightmare that never left them. Survivors wrote about the overwhelming smell of death, the grotesque sight of bloated corpses, and the heartbreaking moment of covering a friend's body with sand. Some soldiers broke down as they dug. Others grew numb, treating it as just another duty. But one thing was clear: Normandy's liberation was not just written in blood, it was carved into the land itself. Fields and beaches turned into cemeteries, graves dug under fire, and bodies silently testifying to the cost of freedom. As the chaos of D-Day subsided and the Allies pushed further inland, specialized teams took over one of the most haunting tasks of the war: collecting and burying the dead. For the US Army, these were the Graves Registration Units. For the British and Canadians, similar groups were deployed. Their work was methodical but grim. They recovered bodies from beaches, hedgerows, and fields, often days after the fighting. Identification tags were collected, personal effects bagged, and details logged before burial. Where possible, they even tried to give soldiers an individual grave, even if the circumstances were hurried and conditions overwhelming. Temporary cemeteries began to spring up just beyond the beaches. At first they were simple: rows of white wooden crosses marking American or British soldiers, Stars of David for Jewish troops. Helmets sometimes served as markers until proper crosses could be made. German dead were buried too, but separately. In many cases they were laid in larger group graves, often without the same care given to Allied troops. There was bitterness in the air. German soldiers were the enemy, and few Allied soldiers wanted to linger over their burials. Still, practicality required that every body be dealt with. Disease, moral, and basic humanity demanded it. The devastation of Normandy didn't stop with soldiers. Civilians caught in the crossfire were also buried in makeshift graves, sometimes by their own families, other times by Allied troops or local priests. Entire villages mourned together, with mass graves dug for bomb victims. For many French families, the liberation of June 1944 carried the unbearable shadow of personal loss. For those who had to carry out the burials, the toll was immense. Many were burying men they had fought beside just days earlier. Soldiers recalled the wrenching feeling of recognizing a friend among the dead, of writing his name on a simple wooden cross and then moving on to the next. There was no time for long ceremonies. Chaplains offered brief prayers, often interrupted by the sound of artillery in the distance. The war was still moving forward, and burials had to keep pace. By July 1944, the Normandy countryside was dotted with small cemeteries, some near beaches, others in orchards or churchyards. These were not meant to be permanent, but they reflected the urgency of the moment. The dead had to be honored, recorded, and laid to rest quickly, even as new battles claimed more lives each day. Normandy itself became a patchwork of graves, Allied, German, and civilian. Each told a story of sacrifice, defeat, or tragedy. In the months after D-Day, the Allies began consolidating the scattered temporary burials into official cemeteries. Graves registration teams carefully exhumed bodies from orchards, churchyards, and roadside fields, moving them to newly designated sites. Each body was reburied with respect, names recorded, and families notified. The most famous of these is the Normandy American Cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer, perched on the cliffs above Omaha Beach. Today, more than 9,000 white crosses and stars of David stand in perfect rows, but each one represents a soldier first buried in haste, then moved here for eternity. The Germans too received formal cemeteries, but only after the war. Under the care of the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgrabefürsorge, German War Graves Commission, bodies were reinterred in sites like Lagam, where more than 21,000 German soldiers lie. Unlike the white American crosses, Lagam is marked by dark stone slabs and a central mound, reflecting the somber acknowledgement of a defeated army. These cemeteries remind visitors that both liberators and occupiers paid with blood, and that Normandy became a vast graveyard for young men on both sides. Not every soldier could be recovered. Many bodies were lost at sea, dragged out by the tides, or buried under the sand. Others were obliterated by artillery and bombing. To this day, thousands remain listed as missing in action, their names carved into memorial walls instead of headstones. For families back home, the uncertainty was devastating. Some waited months, even years, for confirmation of a loved one's death. Others never received closure at all. For the men who fought there, Normandy was not just a battlefield, it was a burial ground. Veterans who returned decades later often described being overwhelmed by the sight of the cemeteries, realizing that the friends they had buried in the chaos of 1944 now lay in serene, manicured rows. Yet beneath the order and symmetry lies the memory of horror. Beaches once scattered with bodies, villages where mass graves were dug, and farmers' fields turned into cemeteries overnight. Today, visitors walk among these cemeteries in silence. Families place flowers, schoolchildren read the names, and historians remind us that the liberation of Europe came at a staggering human price. Normandy has become not only a symbol of victory, but also of loss. Every cross, every stone, every name carved into granite is a reminder of what happened when the guns fell silent and the true cost of D-Day was revealed, not just in the lives lived, but in the thousands of bodies buried in its aftermath. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.